KMC HD3 Detroit, KMPS HD3 Seattle, WBMX HD3 Boston.
And on AOL Radio and Yahoo Launchcast. Psychic Radio is now CBS Radio's The Sky. Back to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. Call now 248-545-SOUL. New skyradio.com.
Do we know any more about UFOs and flying saucers today than we did in 1961? Has anything changed since the alleged abduction of Betty and Barney Hill 50 years ago? And most of all, how much control do we really have over our own planet?
You've changed very much for the better, Ben, over the last 50 years.
Oh, thank you.
Greetings, friends, and welcome once again to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. Officially, at least, this is our 266th broadcast, and a very special one it is. I'm Paul, and opening the show today was my son, co-host, and partner in the paranormal, Ben.
Doesn't sound as good. Because usually there's like three P's, partner in the paranormal, Paul, well, whatever.
Right, whatever.
Hello, I'm Ben.
And it's hard to believe that it's been over 2 years since our good friend, nuclear physicist, lecturer Stanton T. Friedman, has been with us on Behind the Paranormal, but he's with us this evening. Stan received his BSc and MSc degrees in physics from the University of Chicago in 1955 and 1956. He was employed for 14 years as a nuclear physicist by such companies as GE, GM, Westinghouse, TRW Systems, Aerojet General Nucleonics, and McDonnell Douglas, working in such highly advanced, classified, and eventually canceled programs as nuclear aircraft fission and fusion rockets and various compact nuclear power plants for space and terrestrial applications. Stan became interested in UFOs in 1958, and since 1967 has lectured about them at more than 600 colleges and 100 professional groups in 50 U.S. states, 10 Canadian provinces, and 18 other countries, in addition to various nuclear consulting efforts. He has published more than 90 UFO papers and has appeared on hundreds of radio and television programs, including Larry King Live in 2007 and twice in 2008, and many documentaries. He is the original civilian investigator of the Roswell incident and co-authored Crash at Corona, the definitive study of the Roswell incident. Top Secret Magic, his controversial book about the Majestic 12 group, was published in 1996 and went through 6 printings. An expanded edition was published in 2005. He is co-author with Kathleen Marden, Betty Hill's niece, and the guest on our August 22nd Boston Providence show, of a book in 2007, Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience. Stan's book, Flying Saucers and Science, was published in June 2008 and is in its 3rd printing already. His newest book, also co-authored with Kathleen Marden, was Science is Wrong, released in June 2010. He has provided written testimony to congressional hearings and appeared twice at the United Nations. Stan was presented with a Lifetime UFO Achievement Award in Leeds, England in 2002 by UFO Magazine of the UK. His website is stantonfriedman.com, www.stantonfriedman.com.
Stanton Friedman, welcome back to Behind the Paranormal.
I can't believe it's been that long.
Yeah, I can't
either.
It's
so darn busy. You know, that's what it is.
Exactly. And I wanted to thank you for rushing back from wherever you were by plane to be on the show tonight.
Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan.
Oh, Sault Ste. Marie. Okay. Well, we talked. We'll get into this later, but we communicated with each other when you were in Toronto this afternoon, and we have a rather interesting letter from a very interesting person, which we'll get into. But in the meantime, Ben is going to start our questions for the better part of the show here. So.
All right, Stan. I have a question I've always wanted to ask you, but I always forgot to ask it until now. I don't mean any disrespect by saying this. It's just been on my mind forever. How do you get away with the things you say? I mean, do government people come knocking on your door, or what?
Well, I had somebody call me and say, how come you're still alive, Stan?
Well, Ben essentially asked the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anybody who's listened to me at one of my lectures and stuff knows that I have a deep respect for national security, that I don't go off half-cocked saying all kinds of crazy things. I do not believe, as some do, that everything we know should be put on the table, disclose everything. There is a legitimate national security interest here. And we don't normally go around sharing what we learn about advanced technology with others unless they're sharing what they know, which they certainly are not. So I also am very careful not to break the law by soliciting classified material for which I don't have a need to know from people who do have a need to know. I'm not saying I'd throw it away if somebody sent it to me, but I am not asking people to commit treason. And so I get away with it, A, because I say the same thing in private as I do in public, and B, because I think I may be doing exactly what they want done, that is getting the public ready for some kind of disclosure, getting people away from the notion of this is crazy stuff. And I get a lot of people telling me they're so glad that I appear on shows like yours, on Coast to Coast and other ones. They like my approach to things. I get this all the time. I hate to admit it, but television is a very powerful medium, and so are motion pictures. And, I've written several books, but more people watch television and watch movies than read the books. So I think that from the comments I get from people, wherever I go, this is crazy. Here I am. I had my 77th birthday, July 29th.
Happy birthday.
2 weeks. Thank you. 2 weeks ago, roughly. Okay, this year I have participated in conferences in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, in Warsaw, Poland, near Sao Paulo, Brazil, in St. John's, Newfoundland, in Irvine, California, in Roswell, New Mexico, in Phoenix, Arizona, in Lawrence, Kansas, in Atlanta, Georgia, just in Michigan. I'm busier than a bee. And what I find, no matter where I went, including Saudi Arabia and Warsaw and Sao Paulo, is people are telling me they see me on television. And, I must have a strange face or something. They remember the face. I'm not sure they always remember the name. But, they tell me they watch me all the time on the tube. Now, I must say, living in Canada as I do, that we don't get all the U.S. History Channel programs, for example. And so people tell me they saw me on the tube the other day, and didn't you see it? No, I didn't see it. Nobody told me about it. And I probably did the interview 2 years ago anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm keeping busy. I find that there is enormous interest, and I'm very pleased about that. And it's serious interest. And not just because they buy my books, but because of the questions that they ask. People ask sensible questions indicating they've been wondering about this subject in a sensible kind of way. And so they look to me to give a hard time to the nasty, noisy negativist, the naysaying newsmen, the fossilized physicists, as I call them. Well, somebody has to carry the flag, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And I guess I've been elected. And also, because I'm my own boss, I don't need to please anybody but me. I don't worry about losing tenure at some university if I say that SETI, S-E-T-I, really stands for Silly Effort to Investigate, which it does. So I take on the astronomers and the SETI cultists, as I've called them, and I don't need to worry about it. Don't say anything too strong because somebody might be unhappy. I've done debates with people. I'm fearless in that sense. And incidentally, I've made I used to drive all the time from Albuquerque to Roswell. It's 200 miles of nothing. And if somebody wanted to take me out, my answering service always had my detailed itinerary. And they're under instructions, tell people where I'll be, when, what hotel, et cetera, et cetera. And boy, you want to stretch a road where you could take somebody out without anybody knowing it. It's sure from Albuquerque to Roswell.
Well, we're glad you're still with us. So,
yeah, me too.
Yeah,
me too.
All right, so Stan, let's let's move on from that. And so, what do we know, or do we know any more about flying saucers now than we did when the field first got started?
We know a great deal more, as a matter of fact, and it's not just because of freedom of information, but because an awful lot of people have worked very hard to collect, review, evaluate, publish data, facts, solid information, and it's kind of appropriate, I guess. I'm right in the middle of writing a column about an article in the June issue of Air Force magazine by a guy who was the editor of the magazine for 18 years and now is a contributing editor. And Air Force speaks out, and he gets everything wrong. They must be worried. He can't get his facts straight about anything, whether it's Blue Book or the Condon Report or Roswell or, so I do this kind of thing. What we know, for example, you wouldn't know it from reading his article, of course. We know that the latest explanation for Roswell, Annie Jacobson's crazy Martian War of the Worlds simulated event to cause panic in the United States, is total malarkey. We know, and a very important thing that we know that we didn't know back a long time ago, is the statement made by Air Force General Carroll Bolender, Carroll. And Bolender was an Air Force general who was working on the lunar excursion module. And once we landed on the moon, he didn't have to work 12-hour days, as he told me when I talked to him about 10 years after he wrote this memo. He was given the job of what should we do, figuring out what we should do, we, the Air Force, should do about Project Blue Book, because the Condon people had recommended early in 1969 that it hasn't contributed anything to science, which I would say is probably true. And what should we do about it? And so Bolender was given this assignment, no previous involvement, and he made the following statement. His memo resulted in the closure of Project Blue Book. This is in October the closure act physically happened in December of '69. He said, reports of UFOs which could affect national security are made in accordance with Joint Army-Navy Air Force Publication 146 or Air Force Manual 55-11 and are not part of the Blue Book system, which is an astonishing statement. But he went on, 2 paragraphs later, he says, if the government closes Project Blue Book, the public won't have a government office to which they can report UFO sightings. However, as previously noted, reports which could affect national security will continue to be investigated using the procedures established for that purpose. Now, that's an astonishing statement. I managed to locate him. He's dead now, unfortunately. I don't know how to reach him now, but some people do.
Well, maybe we could help you with that.
Yeah. There are paranormal conduits hither and yon, I guess.
Yeah, right.
I talked to him, and he was quite decent on the phone. And I said, sounds like you're saying there were 2 separate channels for UFO reports. So I'm
going to have to stop you there, Stan. I'm awfully sorry, but we have to take a break. So
okay.
We'll right back on Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on CBS New Sky Radio, newskyradio.com, with our guest, Stanton Friedman. Stay with us.
CBS Radio's The New Sky. NewSkyRadio.com. This is the Lisa J. Smith Show.
Hi, this is Lisa J. Join me for Lisa J. Now at 3 o'clock Eastern on CBS Radio The Sky. I'm bringing to you some great guests, numerologists, angel card readings, and more. That's at 3 o'clock Eastern on CBS The Sky.
Look up to the sky. Psychic Radio is now CBS Radio's The Sky. Reach out, newskyradio.com. Psychic Radio is now CBS Radio's The Sky. Back to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. Call now 248-545-SOUL. New skyradio.com.
And we are back after the announcement by the fellow whom I'm sure Stan will agree sounds suspiciously like Nick Pope. I always thought. Anyway, Stan, you were telling us before the break about what was happening with Blue Book and the
Bollinger Memo. Yes.
Yeah, the Bollinger Memo. Please continue.
Well, yeah, and it was a shocking revelation. Bob Todd, who is no longer with us, this was in a pile of Freedom of Information Act request stuff that he got, and he published some of it, and when we finally got hold of it, I talked to General Bollinger, and I said to him, it sounds like you're talking about two separate reporting channels, one for stuff that affects national security, and one for everything else. And he said, yes. And we agreed that one way, I've had reports of saucers that went down the runway at an Air Force base, Strategic Air Command base, where nuclear weapons were stored. And we agreed that would be a national security problem. If we all go outside right now and watch a saucer go by, or three of them or whatever, that's not a national security problem. It happens all the time. And it doesn't involve data obtained by classified capability, fancy radar and spy satellites and all this kind of stuff. So what this does is put the lie to the statement that the Air Force has been making since 1969, that they have no interest in UFOs and there is no national security concern about it. What he said, basically, was, there is a national security concern. As a matter of fact, if you look at the instructions given to pilots of our most sophisticated aircraft, the F-16, F-117, and a whole bunch of these things, you will find instructions for them to report if anything strange that they see, including an unidentified surface ship, an unidentified submarine, an unidentified aircraft, or an unidentified flying object. That's recent. In other words, they've been lying through their teeth, and that should be no surprise. Every time I read it, it still makes me angry. One of the things that really drove me into this field was finding a copy of the biggest study ever done for the Air Force, Project Blue Book, Special Report 14, at the University of California, Berkeley Library, way back in about 1960. And I was totally shocked, A, that it hadn't been mentioned in any of the 15 books that I had read. How come? And B, that it had over 240 charts, tables, graphs, and maps. I'm a data hound, and boy, there was data. And C, that the Secretary of the Air Force, we're not talking about some clerk, we're talking about the Secretary of the Air Force, Donald Quarles, made a totally false statement in the press release that accompanied this. He said, on the basis of this report, they didn't give the title of the report, Blue Book Special Report 14, and somebody surely would have said, hey, what happened to 1 through 13? They would have been listed as classified if anybody had answered the question. Anyway, what Quarles said was, on the basis of this report, we believe that no objects such as those properly described as flying saucers have overflown the United States. I am sure that even the unknown 3% could have been identified as conventional phenomena or illusions if more complete observational data had been available, unquote. That sounds very straightforward, but it's a total and complete lie. That is, the unknowns weren't 3%, they were 21.5%. That's not a rounding off error. They were completely separate from the cases for which there was insufficient information. It was a separate category for them. That was another 9.3%. So where does the Secretary of the Air Force get off lying through his teeth? It was quoted all over the place, and apparently nobody asked who did the work, where was the work done, what was the title of the report, or anything like that. The work was done at Battelle Memorial Institute in Columbus, Ohio. Very well respected research and development company. They looked at 3,201 sightings, for goodness sakes. They did a quality evaluation. They found the better the quality, the more likely to be unidentifiable. So when you get data like that, which seems to be unknown to all the nasty, noisy negativists, this study never gets discussed by the nasty, noisy negativists.
Yeah.
Don't bother me with the facts. My mind's made up.
I run into that all the time. Absolutely. Ben's got a question here about how you got started, or what exactly convinced you. Yeah, good.
Okay, well, you basically said the question. What exactly convinced you that at least some UFOs are extraterrestrial spacecraft?
Well,
as opposed to, other
looking at the best cases in all these studies, look at the congressional testimony of 1968 by Dr. James E. McDonald. 41 outstanding cases, multiple witness radar visuals cases, sightings by pilots, sightings over big cities, the work of Ted Phillips, who's looked at more than 4,000 physical trace cases. When you start looking at these, even if you look at Alan Hynek's book, The UFO Experience, if you look at the UFO evidence by Richard Hall, which has data on 4,500 cases, of which about 745 were unexplainable, it's just a huge amount of data. And we start reading the accounts from scientists, I just couldn't avoid the conclusion that son of a gun. Remember, the question we're asking is not what are UFOs or are all UFOs alien spacecraft. The question is, are any? And the answer is yes. It's kind of like if you're looking for cancer and you're testing a whole host of drugs, the question isn't, do all these drugs cure cancer? And of course, the answer is no. The question is, do any? And if the answer is yes, that's what you want if you got cancer. Don't tell me about all those that don't work. Mm-hmm. So I come from a background in which you got to focus on the small part of stuff that's important, and radiation shielding for high-performance nuclear systems. And most isotopes aren't fissionable. Fortunately, there are a couple that are. Most isotopes are not good absorbers of neutrons. Fortunately, we have some few that are. And so I learned early on, absorbing 98% of the radiation which is emitted in a reactor sounds great, except you killed everybody that walked by. It's what gets out that matters, not the fact that I grabbed 98%, isn't that wonderful? No, it isn't. I got to grab 99.9999%. So I have this jaundiced viewpoint, if you will. So I was looking at enough of these cases, talking to people. I visited Project Blue Book several times, way back in the 60s. And so it's a huge amount of data. I've talked to Ted Phillips with the physical trace cases, the multiple witness radar visual cases. And the kicker is, too, that I have a background in advanced technology. One of the major objections to UFOs, you can't get here from there. And those guys are still thinking about chemical rockets. Mm-hmm. I don't worry about chemical rockets. I worked on nuclear rockets. I worked on fission rockets, less than 7 feet in diameter, power level of 4,000 megawatts. That's twice the power of Grand Coulee Dam, 7 feet in diameter. Don't tell me about chemical rockets. I worked on fusion rockets. We did a study of them. Use the right stuff in the right way and kick particles out the back end that have 10 million times as much energy per particle as they can get in a dumb old chemical rocket. And one of my battles has to do with the fact that the ancient academics and fossilized physicists seem to think that the only place that advanced research and development work gets done is at universities. That's absurd. Two different people have told me, Stan, if Roswell actually happened, they'd have had to take half the physicists out of the colleges across the country to look at that. I said, you've got to be kidding. There's Los Alamos, which back then had 8,000 employees, and Sandia Corporation, another nuclear weapons lab, and Lawrence Livermore, and Oak Ridge, and Hanford. When we wanted to build a stealth fighter, did we go to some university and say, oh, give me 4 professors and 20 grad students? No, we went to Lockheed and spent $10 billion over 10 years to build a stealth aircraft. When I was working on nuclear airplanes, way back in 58, a long time ago.
I was in kindergarten.
Well, at GE in Cincinnati, we spent $100 million that year, and that was a lot of money back then. We employed 3,500 people, and we had 1,100 of them who were engineers and scientists. And the guys in academia seem to have no idea about any of this stuff. You want technology, you go to places that can spend the money. And people also, another problem with the ancient academics is they don't seem to understand that governments, companies working for the government, can keep secrets. The worst example of that, and, it'll sound a little strange, but bear with me, Dr. Tyson, who's head of the Hayden Planetarium, a very charismatic kind of speaker. I've seen him on television. He has done two things that illustrate the problems we have here. One is on that Peter Jennings mockumentary of February 24th, 2005, he claimed that our fastest rocket, the Voyager spacecraft, would take 70,000 years to get to the nearest star, and scientists want their data a lot more quickly than that. He neglected to mention that it doesn't have a propulsion system on it. It's been coasting since it left the Earth. A minor detail, of course. And then a few months ago at Penn State University, to a crowd of 1,800, according to the news story, he pointed out that, look, these people say, these UFO people say that the government's covering things up. The governments can't cover anything up. The proof of that is, look how much we know about President Clinton's genitalia. Now think about that for a minute. What the heck does that have to do, Monica Lewinsky, et cetera, with things like the NRO, the NSC, the NSA, the DIA, the CIA? These are the agents we're talking about. And, of course, Dr. Tyson isn't the only one who says such stupid things. Dr. Seth Shostak of the SETI Institute. Governments can't keep secret. He said, look, this is the same government that fouled up with FEMA about Katrina. It's the same government that operates the post office, which is going to lose umpteen $1 billion this year. What in the world has that got to do with those alphabet soup agencies? Utterly ridiculous. Don't these guys live in the real world? And my only answer is they don't.
Yeah, well, there is a real world.
Well, secrecy is a way of life under many programs. Just to give you one example, the NRO, National Reconnaissance Office, admitted about 3 years ago, this is in my book, Flying Saucers in Science, along with a bunch of others, but I particularly like this one. They admitted that they had canceled a program they had with Boeing, looking at changing the architecture, how components are arranged, of the spy satellites. They're the guys with the big ones that cost maybe $500 million each, They had only spent $13 billion and didn't get what they wanted. This is in secret. Governments can't keep secrets? Oh, these guys are nuts. You see what I'm saying? That there's a real world, then there's the world occupied by the ancient academics and fossilized physicists and so forth.
Well, that's quite true. We have another break coming up, and I might share a little bit about my own military intel experience and government secrets on this issue in a moment. When we come back, we'll be right back behind the paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on CBS New Sky Radio, newskyradio.com, and our guest, Stanton Friedman. Stay with us.
Enlighten, empower, enrich. This is CBS Radio's The New Sky. New horizons, no boundaries. All day long, we're devoted to your emotional, physical, and spiritual well-being. With your direct connect to the stars, Lisa J. Smith, The Dr. Pat Show, Liz Souza, Barbara Mackey, Glynis McCants, The Wake Up Call with Elle Newman and Tom Force. Let us know how we're doing. 248-545-7685. Log on. newskyradio.com. 24 hours a day. Your spiritual well-being is our concern. Awaken the extraordinary. Live the life you've imagined. Look up to the sky. CBS Radio's The New Sky. newskyradio.com. New horizons, no boundaries.
There was a man back in 95 whose heart ran out of summers, but before he died, I asked him, wait, what's the come over me, come over me. He said, son, why you gotta sing that tune? Catch a Dylan song or some eclipse of the moon. Let an angel swing and make you swoon. Then you will see, you will see. Then he said, here's a riddle for you. Find the answer. There's a reason for the world, you and I. Pick up my kid from school today. Did you learn anything? 'Cause in the world today, you can't live in a castle far away. Now talk to me, come talk to me. He said, I'm big, but we're smaller than small. In the scheme of things, well, we're nothing at all. Still every mother's child sings a lonely song. So play with me, come play with me. And hey, Dad, here's a riddle for you. Find the answer. There's a reason for the world, you and I said, son, for all I've told you, when you get right down to the reason for the world, who am I? There are secrets that we still have left to find. There have been mysteries from the beginning of time. There are answers we're not wise enough to see. You said you're looking for a clue. I love you free. Here's a riddle for you. Find the answer. There's a reason for the world, you and I.
Psychic Radio is now CBS Radio's The Sky. Back to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. Call now 248-545-SOUL. New skyradio.com. Believe.
And we're here with our very fine guest and our good friend Stanton Friedman, UFO legend. And I wanted to just get his thought on one thing that happened to me. And I know that, Stan, you have a very low opinion of SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. But way back in the day when I was doing some intel work in the military, you're right, the government really cannot keep a secret. What they do is hand out distractions and false information and all, just to keep everybody confused. And one thing that I heard there is a certain intel grapevine that one sometimes hears. I heard about Area 51. This is 30 years ago. And I also heard that when SETI first came online, from day one, they were inundated with thousands upon thousands upon thousands of signals, which were interpreted as man-made, but made by somebody. Had you ever heard anything like that? I found this grapevine to be relatively accurate in many ways. I mean, have you ever heard anything like that?
Yeah. The real kicker here is the powers that be in SETI in the early days, it didn't take them too long to recognize that, geez, the government's got satellites up there putting out all kinds of signals. We got to be really careful. So they stubbed their toes a couple of times, were ready to make a big deal about signals, which it turned out, were from orbiting satellites, for example. And so there was a great deal. The SETI people hadn't been fully aware of how much, what do I call it, the satellite world existed, and all the spy satellites and all the other stuff, the NSA kind of guys, the NRO kind of guys. And that's a whole different world from SETI. In other words, you don't find those guys publishing in the open scientific literature. They don't put out lists of, if you get this frequency, it's our signals and so forth. There's a reason for that, of course, because you don't want to tell the Russians what you're doing. And as soon as you tell people all the signals you're putting out, what frequencies there are and all that, I mean, they may find out eventually, but still, there was a legitimate reason for keeping those secrets. And, well, I'll give you a specific example. Remember the U-2 flights over Russia? We were very anxious to find out what their military capabilities were. And, of course, one got shot down, and there's a whole big international furor about that. The first successful spy satellite was the Corona, for the United States, was the Corona spy satellite, which was launched in 1960. Now, it goes around and around and around. So that first launch got more data than all the U-2 flights that had preceded it about where Russians had air bases and all kinds of stuff. Now, it was a kind of a crude system. They actually sent the film back to Earth to be caught by airplanes. Anyway, it was secret, really secret. The first public discussion, and remember that the first successful one came after 12 failures, all of them in secret. The first public discussion about the Corona spy satellite was 1995. The first one successful was 1960. But there were a whole bunch of others in between. And so we weren't talking about those things. I mean, the Russians knew we had spy satellites, of course, but we weren't giving out information, and the Americans didn't know. So, I'm sure that early on there were guys who picked up signals, and if there were ever a guy I'd like to really check on, it would be Frank Drake, because he got his degree in electrical engineering. Then he went into the Navy for 3 years and worked on electronic countermeasures, which means he had to have a very high security clearance because he had to know what our signals were and what the Russian frequencies were and all this kind of stuff. After he got out, he stayed in the reserve for at least 10 more years, and he went to Harvard and became the first guy to get a degree in radio astronomy, basically. But while he was in the reserve, the head of the Cambridge Unit Number 1 was Donald Menzel, Commander Donald Menzel, member of MJ-12, astronomer, and so forth. So the question is, since the Navy loves to make use of professionals all summer long, and they can get access without having to hire them, full time, I would love to know what Frank Drake knows. And he's not about to tell me, I would say, or anybody else either. But so what I'm saying is this: there's a whole world out there on which enormous amounts of money have been spent compared to civilian efforts along these lines, and where there were signals produced all over the place by not only our satellites but enemy satellites, and we don't want them to know how much we can interpret. See, the problem isn't just that you got a signal, but you got to sort out the information from it. And you guys know that with digital signals, if you pick them up, you need the key. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it's just noise.
Yeah.
So there's a whole, there's a whole counterintelligence world out there. We would sure like to know what they know. They want to know what we know. And there's loads of satellites out there and loads of signals, and a lot of that is classified systems with classified techniques. And so I'm sure there was some embarrassment early on that, hey, we got it, the big signal. Wait a minute, maybe we better check. Damn, it's one of ours.
Yeah, that's very possible. I wanted to get into this. Now, off the air earlier today, we were talking about, I won't give her name because she didn't say that we could, but a well-known physiologist from a prominent university who wanted to ask us some questions, and obviously you're far more qualified than we are. I'm just going to throw them at you. Do you know if any university presses have published books on UFOs?
Yes. I know right off the top of my head of at least 3. One was Dr. David Jacobs' book, The UFO Controversy in America,
he's been a
which
guest.
was a modification of his PhD thesis. It was about 1970 or so. Indiana University Press published that. That was the first one, I'm told, by an academic press. A second book was the one that resulted from the American Association for the Advancement of Science had hearings in Boston at their annual meeting at which they had testimony from about a dozen people, a sort of a debate about UFOs, and that included Jim McDonald and including Donald Menzel. And the proceeding, Carl Sagan was, the chief honcho on the thing. And incidentally, Edward Condon didn't want it to be taking place because we don't want to discuss stuff like this at our meetings, you know. Anyway, Cornell University Press published the book, The UFO Debates, and it was edited by Carl and Thornton Page from Wesleyan University, another astronomer. A third book that I'm aware of is one about UFO abductions. It has papers from maybe a dozen people, including Don Dondery of McGill University and Dave Jacobs and Bud Hopkins and a whole bunch of people by, I want to say, University of Kansas Press. And anybody wants to contact me, I'll dig out the reference. You can get it from Amazon.com, I'm sure, because I can't recall whether it's Kansas State University Press or University of Kansas. I've got to find the book, and I haven't had time since I got home.
Yeah.
But that was excellent. Some of those papers are very good, and I particularly liked Don Dondery, who was a professor of psychology at McGill University. Now, there's another side to this, and that is that a number of universities have had courses taught for credit, mind you, about UFOs. Dave Jacobs has taught one at Temple University for more than 20 years. I think he's retired right now. But and I spoke at Long Beach State University, and Al Lawson taught a course then on UFOs. Dr. Al Lawson. University of North Dakota.
We have to take another break. I'm sorry.
Yep.
We'll be right back behind the paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on CBS New Sky Radio, newskyradio.com with our guest Stanton Friedman. Stick around. We got more coming up.
Welcome
Psychic Radio is now CBS Radio's The Sky. Back to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. Call now 248-545-SOUL. New skyradio.com.
And we're back with our guest, Stanton Friedman, UFO legend. And Stan, I wanted to get to this before we ran out of time, and that is the upcoming on Labor Day weekend, U.S. Labor Day weekend, the Exeter UFO Festival in Exeter, New Hampshire. And of course, this one being the third annual event and marking the 50th anniversary of the Betty and Barney Hill UFO abduction incidents. And next week we're going to have Kathleen Marden as a guest to talk about that. But Stan, you're going to be there, so will we. And what are you going to be talking about at the festival?
Well, I'm going to be talking about primarily, because of the timing and because 3 weeks later we're going to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Hill case with the dedication of an official state monument, that Kathy had to go through hoops to answer all her questions about just a few weeks later up in Lincoln, near where the event took place. I'll be focusing on the star map that Betty saw and that I was chosen to ask to help Marjorie Fish out with what she was doing to try to make sense out of that star map and talk about the results. And the kicker was it gives us a means for evaluating the context. And I just gave a paper at the MUFON conference in which I talked about that it's time to get away from the Copernican view of things. You remember Nicolaus Copernicus, well, I don't mean personally, of course.
Not personally, no.
In 1543, he wrote a book in which he had the gall to suggest that the Earth wasn't the center of the universe. The general consensus was that all the other planets and the sun all moved around the Earth. Now, he died the year the book was published, and so the book was banned by the church for 300 years, and Giordano Bruno got burned at the stake for agreeing with him. And now we suddenly have a recognition of, gee, that's not the way the universe is. A lot of people may not realize we didn't know there was more than one galaxy until the early 20s. Mm-hmm. And so we have a whole new concept. And what this Hill map does, I was the first to publish an article about it in Saga magazine, long gone, and I instigated the article that was done in Astronomy magazine by Terence Dickinson. Got more response than anything they'd ever published. It was back in the early 70s. The kicker is here we have the base stars in this map. I'll go through how we got there, but tonight at least, here we have the base stars are Zeta 1 and Zeta 2 Reticuli. It's a constellation of Reticulum. It's 39.3 light years away. You can't see them from here. You got to go below the equator. Now here's the kicker. These two stars just happen to be the closest to each other pair of sun-like stars. Maybe 5 or 10% of the stars are sun-like. Not too big, not too small, not too old, not too new, not varying in their energy output, a whole other bunch of criteria, like the sun. And these two stars are not only the closest to each other pair of sun-like stars, they're an eighth of a light year apart. Wow. That means they're more than 30 times closer than the sun is to the next star out, Alpha Centauri. So we're out in the boonies. Zeta Reticulan's got next-door neighbors. From a planet around one, the other one's visible all day long. Real easy to pick up planets around the other star.
So planets have been discovered around these stars?
Not yet. Not yet. Kepler can't look at these. They're in the wrong direction. The kicker, though, is these two stars are about 1 billion years older than the sun. So if you combine those two facts, that they've been around a long time and they got next-door neighbors, whichever one gets started first, you'd expect them to develop interstellar travel pretty quickly. You know, the neighbor is only an eighth of a light year apart, no big deal. So it gives us an entirely different concept of what happens in a civilization that started out much earlier than we did, and where we got neighbors around. You develop colonization, migration. You know, people would travel for their honeymoon over to the other place. Yeah. It changes the perspective entirely. And
well,
so
I'd let
that's important.
This, but we're running out of time, and I just, as always, especially with Stan, we have 100,000 questions we're just not going to get to tonight. But thank you, Stan. I wanted to give you a chance to talk about your books and your website.
Okay, well, the website is very easy, www.stantonfriedman, that's FRIEDMAN.com. And it lists all my books, Top Secret Magic, about the MJ-12 documents, some of which I think are genuine, most of which are phony. I don't care about the phony ones. Flying Saucers in Science, 2008, which looks at the question of can you get here from there? What are these large-scale scientific studies? What's wrong with the SETI cultists, etc.? Captured is listed there. Kathleen did most of the work, 85% to be precise. Mm-hmm. Our book, Science Was Wrong, which we each did half of that one, 14 instances of smart people saying very stupid things which have consequences. And it's time for another one. I mean, there's so many other examples. You know? Exactly. And my book, Crash at Corona, my first book, and it's about the Roswell incident. And so I also have things on there that you can't get anyplace else, like Project Blue Book Special Report 14, the biggest study ever done. Mm-hmm. It's available there. I've got DVDs, a new book, UFOs and Aliens, for which I wrote 2 articles. Kathy wrote 1, and there are 10 others. That just came out a couple months ago. And other DVDs, UFOs are real, and there's a debate. Are flying saucers real? An official fancy debate at Middle Tennessee State University between myself and James McGaha, the Air Force pilot who says, ain't nothing to flying saucers, folks. He's wrong. And so this is a place to also Recollections of Roswell. First-hand testimony from 27 Roswell witnesses, almost all of whom are now deceased.
That's amazing. Well, I'm afraid we're done. Thank you so much, Stan, for joining us tonight, and we'll see you in Exeter, Labor Day weekend, and all proceeds from that event go to children's charities in that area, everyone. So please come and see Stan Friedman and Kathleen Martin and us at the Exeter Festival. Stan, thanks a lot. We'll see you there.
My pleasure. See you there.
Okay.
Guten Tag.
So many thanks to our producer, Will Kosnick, and we'll see you next Sunday, August 21st, right here on CBS New Sky Radio, newskyradio.com. Ben and I will host an open line show with our ubiquitous stack of ever-growing emails.
In the meantime, tune into our New England Drive Time show on WOON 1240 AM and ONWorldwide.com at 6 p.m. Eastern every time on Monday, or 6 p.m. Eastern time every Monday. And remember, you can always get free podcasts of all our shows, along with show schedules and guest information at www.behindtheparanormal.com.
And we leave you this evening with a word from that dear old French philosopher Albert Camus. Life is the sum of all your choices, unquote.
So thanks for being with us on our great cosmic journey, and we will see you next time.